Okay, they're frustrated, and they say they're prepared to battle. Premiers have just wrapped up a three-day meeting, and they tackle a broad range of issues, from missing Aboriginal women, healthcare, pipelines, national energy strategy. But the most pressing issue is the Canada Jobs Grant. That's a federal program the premiers say they were not consulted on. They say the program designed to create jobs will burden the provinces with millions in extra costs. Will the First Ministers stand united and take on the feds on this? Did they make any real progress on that at their meeting in Niagara-on-the-Lake? Joining me now from Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario Premier and Chair of the Week's Council of the Federation meeting, Kathleen Wynne. Premier Wynne, good to have you back on the program.
Pleasure to be with you, Evan.
It was a lot of ground covered at this meeting, but what was the most important issue in your mind to emerge, and the most important message you have for the federal government?
The most important issue, and the one that we kept coming back to, was creation of jobs and the economy. And there were a couple of issues that we discussed under that rubric. And the Canada Job Grant, there was unanimity around the table that the way the Canada Job Grant is designed right now, it's not going to work for any of the provinces, which is why we have asked for a federal, provincial, territorial ministers meeting to really engage with the federal government on the redesign of that. And secondly, the need for investment in strategic infrastructure. You know, that's a job creation issue. It's an economic driver, and so we need a partner on both of those issues in the federal government. We haven't had that. We don't have the federal government at the table meeting with Canada's premiers. That needs to happen, and we would come to much better resolutions if we had the federal government working with us.
You've talked about that. One of the themes was a lack of consultation, and we'll get back to the jobs grant issues. You said there was no consultation on that. You've talked about not having a federal partner at the table. How frustrated are the premiers that the Prime Minister has not met with all of the premiers and territorial leaders since 2009, although he's met individually? How frustrated is everyone?
Well, I think we have said repeatedly that it would be much better to have the federal government at the table, to have the Prime Minister engage with us. The frustration comes from that not happening, but it also comes from the kind of mistakes that get made because that relationship is not in place. So the design of the Canada Jobs Grant, issues around continued health care funding, those are the kinds of things that don't get resolved up front because there isn't that consultation and there isn't that relationship with the whole group of Canada's premiers at the table.
Let's talk about one of those things that you're calling a mistake there, the jobs grant. There's the premiers unanimously agreed to reject that. I put your complaints and the premier's complaints yesterday to Labour Minister Kelly Leitch about it. You were saying there was no consultation with the premiers on this. There was provincial jurisdiction on this. There's a question about clawing back $600 million and what that will mean for the provinces. I said all that to her. Here's what she said.
I think the message back to the premiers are we're focused on creating jobs and they should step to the plate and do exactly the same thing.
All right, you say it's about jobs. She's saying step to the plate and do it. What do you make of that statement?
Well, I think it demonstrates that there isn't a good understanding of exactly what the Canada Jobs Grant as it's designed now would do, because what would happen, and I'll use Ontario as an example, right now we get $194 million as part of the labour market agreement. If the Canada Jobs Grant were implemented as it stands, we would have to take $116 million of that, and that would mean canceling programs like bridge training and second career that are helping people get into the job market. We'd have to take that money, put it into the new program, and then we would have to backfill and find another $116 million. So $232 million it would cost Ontario. That would mean that there would be programs that would be canceled and people who would not get jobs because those programs are not in place. That's why we need to work with the federal government to redesign the program. We're willing to do that, but there should have been consultation up front. Every premier sitting around the table said that it would not work for them. Our concern is that employers would not take up the Canada Job Grant as it exists, and so it would not work.
Well, Jason Kenney now says...
the consultation up front would have helped that.
Well, all right, so there wasn't consultation up front, although Kelly Leitch said she was across the country consulting what she called stakeholder groups. Jason Kenney says he'll meet with the premiers, not necessarily to renegotiate the deal, we're not sure what will happen, but to explain it to the premiers. What do you want from Jason Kenney?
Well, let me just say this, that I think it is a success that we have We've got engagement of Minister Kenney on this, you know, the fact that he has said he's willing to meet. The conversation will, I think, not go necessarily the way Minister Kenney envisions it, because, as I say, there's unanimity around the table of Canada's premiers that the job grant as it exists now will not work. So the engagement is good, and we'll let that conversation happen now.
Let me go through a couple of other issues because it was a busy agenda. Premiers also unanimously called for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Kelly Leitch, the minister responsible for status of women on this program, said, you know, they're going to look, they won't do that. They've already got a parliamentary committee studying this issue. They don't need a national inquiry. Your take?
Well, my take is that it's unfortunate that there was a rejection of the National Aboriginal Organization's call before that call had even been formalized. And I think that it is, again, I think it's a mistake for the federal government not to engage with the Aboriginal organizations on this. The premiers agreed that we would support the NAO, the National Aboriginal Organization's call for a national inquiry, because this is an important issue to every province. And so my hope is that the federal government will reconsider and that they will actually engage with the Aboriginal organizations on this very important issue.
What about the federal government? What do you want from the feds, or what do the premiers want, in terms of improving safety for transporting hazardous material around the country by rail in the wake of the Lac Mégantic tragedy?
Well, I will just say that there was, there was quite a lot of discussion about the Lake Mégantic tragedy. It then became part of a broader conversation about a need for better monitoring, better regulation, making sure that safety, rail safety, and disaster mitigation and liability insurance provisions were adequate and that they were in place. And it broadened to a discussion about marine salvage. It's again, we're sitting around the table with people from all parts of the country, and so making sure that that the movement of goods, the movement of dangerous materials, and the reaction to the disasters that we have seen is in place, and that there is enough support. And so it was a very useful conversation. Madame Marois was asked whether the steps that we have called for are enough, and she has said it's a step in the right direction. Better information, more timely information, better regulation and monitoring. So those are the steps that we are calling.
What role, there's lots of talk about disaster mitigation, and you talk about infrastructure. They're separate issues. There's investment in infrastructure, but there's also a lot of infrastructure, billions of dollars needed in terms of disaster mitigation. What role, in your view, does climate change play? And in your view, is the federal government doing enough to take that issue seriously?
Well, it's interesting you said they're separate issues. I actually think that there is overlap when we talk about flooding, when we talk about the kinds of weather patterns that are changing, and that those weather patterns are dictating that we need to make sure that we have the right infrastructure in place. So those investments in infrastructure that are about maintaining aging infrastructure, but also about enhancing infrastructure so that we can deal with the effects of climate change and extreme weather. I think that those are related issues, and it's one of the reasons that I wanted to put this issue on the table, that we need a long-term infrastructure plan. You know, the federal government has said that over 10 years they're going to put in between $47 and $50 billion into infrastructure. In Ontario alone, we're putting $35 billion into infrastructure spending over the next 3 years. So there's an acknowledgement among Canada's premiers that we need that investment.
The other issue was the Senate. Premier Brad Wall has been pushing for the idea of total abolition of the Senate. That would need the premiers to support that. How much traction did the abolition of the Senate get?
Well, Premier Wall presented his proposal, and he was thanked for bringing it to the table. But you know, there was pretty much agreement among the other premiers that this is not an issue that is top of mind for our constituents, and there was not a long discussion about it at all.
All right, you've had a very, very busy weekend. You've got big by-elections coming up on August the 1st, so you've got a busy time. Premier, I appreciate your time as always.
Thank you very, very much. All the best.